A lot of people say, oh, we're leaving all this debt to our grandkids. The grandkids don't have to pay it. I mean, they can leave. People used to ask me, where do you stand on the wall? And the main reason I was against it is I said, if we build that wall, it can be used to keep the Americans in. There's no way out, until there's a violent revolution.
Are we headed towards a recession that's going to be worse than 2008?
I think so. In fact, I think we're actually in recession, although by the time they write the history books on this era, it may be considered a depression. I think that the numbers that we get from the government are not accurate by design. So I don't really think that the economy is growing in any real sense. I think that the way they compute the numbers, I think, is deceiving. I think that for most Americans, their standard of living is declining. I don't think the economy is really getting bigger. I think we're spending more and we're borrowing more and going deeper into debt. We're paying more for everything we buy. And a lot of that consumption ends up feeding into the GDP. And so we get a bigger GDP number and we think, oh, that means the economy is growing. But I think it's all being distorted by the inflation and the debt. Meanwhile, individuals that are living in the economy are struggling. Their cost of living is going up. You have a record increase in the number of people holding multiple jobs, not just 2 jobs, but 3 jobs or more. And they still can't make ends meet. You've got record credit card debt, which is now over $1 trillion, first time ever. And we almost have $2 trillion in student loan debt. I mean, that has just exploded. And all sorts of debt. If we really had a growing economy, people would be getting out of debt. Right? Well, that's what happens when you're doing well. You pay off your debt. You build up your savings. The savings rate has collapsed in the last couple of years. That's not a sign of economic strength. That's desperation. People are tapping into whatever savings they have left just to make ends meet. If you look at Joe Biden's popularity, he's as unpopular as any sitting president since Jimmy Carter. So, that's quite a feat. But if you remember, when Jimmy Carter was president, things were pretty bad, right? You had, the misery index, high inflation, high interest rates, high unemployment. You have to go back to that time period to find an incumbent president this unpopular. So what does that tell you? Because normally you vote your pocketbook. If the economy were really strong, voters wouldn't care if Biden was falling asleep at meetings or, couldn't remember, who he was married to or where he was giving his speech. If people were feeling good about themselves and their economy, they would credit Joe Biden. The fact that he's so unpopular is more a function of how bad the economy is. And no matter how much he wants to pretend that it's doing well, the poll numbers display the opposite, and so does everything else with economic reality. I mean, we have record budget deficits. If times were good, the government would be running smaller deficits. They would be collecting more taxes. They wouldn't be spending as much on government assistance. Our trade deficits are at record highs. If we had a booming economy, we'd be making more stuff. We'd be exporting that stuff, or we'd be importing less because we would just consume what we produced ourselves. But our economy is really shrinking, and that's why we're on life support. We're dependent on foreigners for all the goods that we can't produce, and we have to pay for it on credit because we don't have the real incomes or the savings to afford it.
So I think that answer is going to be jarring for people because for a lot of them, things seem fine. In fact, one thing that I've heard people criticize you for is you've been saying for years now that we're going to get hyperinflation, but it hasn't come yet. And I think a lot of people are going to say depression. We're not in a depression yet, for sure. So the economy works in a certain way. There are physics to it. So what is it that you see that makes a recession or depression either happening now or inevitable? What do you see that they're missing?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think we're in a depression now as far as the economic conditions. I said that by the time the historians look back on this time period, this could be the beginning of that depression, because I think the depression is in our future, really not in our past. And the way we've been kind of holding back the tides of depression is through debt and inflation. And so we've been, kicking the can down the road, but we're really sowing the seeds of the future depression that I believe the time period we're in now will just be lumped in with it, right? Not like this is the earlier stages of that prolonged period that is really going to coincide with, having to come to terms with all the mistakes that we've made in the past. It's like the chickens coming home to roost because of bad monetary and fiscal policy that go back, for decades. We're in a huge hole, and it isn't going to be easy to get out of it. And the time period where we're going to get out of it, that's, it's going to be hard times, and the government is in a position to make those times a lot harder. So, that's a wild card as to how the government is going to react to this unfolding crisis and how much worse they might make it be. Now, as far as hyperinflation, yeah, I was talking about a hyperinflation scenario back in, the early days of the 2008 financial crisis, based on the way the government reacted to that with quantitative easing. And I knew that the road that we were going down could lead to hyperinflation. Now, I always said that was a worst case scenario. I never said, hey, it's for sure. But of course, the media, everybody picks up on my warnings of hyperinflation. I still think that hasn't been taken off the table. And the odds of that are actually greater now than they were when I first started warning about it. But I always said that, look, that's the worst case scenario. You destroy your currency completely, where you're talking Weimar Republic, Zimbabwe. But what I did say was inevitable was very high inflation. And we've just started to experience that in recent years. And I don't think that's over. I mean, I think we're going to see higher inflation. Right now, the high watermark for year-over-year CPI was just over 9%. That's not going to cap this. We're going to go into the double digits. And the first digit might not be a 1. Now that still wouldn't be hyperinflation, right? If we have 20% inflation, that's not hyperinflation. Right?
That's curl up in a fetal position and suck your thumb and cry yourself to sleep territory.
It's bad, but also if you compare what we have now, I guess everybody wants to say, look, it's not that bad because look how much worse it was in the 70s, where we had inflation 10, 11, 12% for several years. What people don't understand is that you're comparing apples to oranges, because the CPI that was in use in the 70s is not the same CPI that we use today.